The financial documents were still spread across my kitchen table. The calculator I had been using sat frozen on the final number. $47 million. It was 9 p.m., exactly when my husband Marcus usually came home from his client meetings. But this time, he wouldn't. I stared at the bank statements that proved everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a lie. My name is Catherine Reynolds, and for 12 years I believed I had married a struggling tax attorney. But what I discovered in his hidden files, what I found about my own family's involvement in his secret empire, it would destroy everything I thought I knew about the people I loved. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you about this life-changing discovery, hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family betrayal that might just change how you see your own relationships. Before that devastating night when I uncovered the truth, my life felt perfectly ordinary. I'm 34 years old, a forensic accountant specializing in fraud investigation for mid-sized businesses. Ironic, considering what I was about to discover. I spent my days tracing missing money, uncovering embezzlement schemes, and exposing financial crimes, never imagining the biggest fraud of all was happening in my own home. Marcus and I met in law school. He was charming, ambitious, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and brought me coffee during late-night study sessions. After graduation, he started his own tax practice while I joined a forensic accounting firm. We bought a modest house in the suburbs, adopted a golden retriever named Cooper, and settled into what felt like the American dream. Our life had a comfortable rhythm. Marcus worked long hours during tax season, took on a few estate planning clients year-round, and constantly worried about making ends meet. We drove older cars, clipped coupons, and I handled all our household finances because numbers weren't his strong suit. He was the creative one. I was the practical one. It worked. Or so I thought. My family situation was complicated. My parents, Robert and Linda Reynolds, had always been financially irresponsible. Dad was a high school history teacher who dreamed of writing the great American novel. Mom worked part-time at a boutique and spent more on clothes than she earned. They lived in perpetual financial chaos, always one emergency away from disaster. My older brother David was different. At 36, he'd built a successful consulting business and lived in obvious wealth. Expensive suits, luxury car, a downtown condo that cost more than most people's houses. He'd always been the golden child, the one who figured out how to make money work for him, while I was just playing with spreadsheets. My sister Nicole, 31, had married well. Her husband James owned several car dealerships, and they lived the suburban dream with their 2 perfect children. Nicole never worked, but somehow always had money for shopping trips, spa days, and elaborate vacations. The person I felt closest to was my great-aunt Margaret, my grandmother's sister. At 78, she lived modestly in a small apartment, surviving on Social Security and a tiny pension from her decades as a bank secretary. Despite having almost nothing, she was the only family member who consistently checked on Marcus and me, who remembered our anniversary without Facebook reminders, who genuinely cared about our well-being. My relationship with money and family had always been strained. When Marcus and I were saving for our house down payment, I'd asked family for help. David had lectured me about learning to manage money better while posting photos of his new Porsche. Nicole had claimed she and James were cash poor, despite their obvious lifestyle. My parents had actually laughed, saying they couldn't help when they couldn't even help themselves. The pattern was always the same. They had money for themselves, their wants, their luxuries. But when I needed help, there were always excuses. Marcus died on a Tuesday. They said it was a heart attack while driving home from a client meeting. The paramedics found him slumped over the wheel in a parking lot downtown. At 35, with no history of heart problems, it seemed impossible. But the autopsy confirmed it. Massive cardiac arrest, probably triggered by stress. The funeral was a blur of black clothing, sympathy casseroles, and people telling me what a wonderful man Marcus had been. My family surrounded me with the kind of attention they'd never shown when he was alive. Suddenly, everyone wanted to help, to support me, to make sure I was taken care of. It wasn't until my brother David pulled me aside after the service that something shifted. "Cat," he said, using the childhood nickname only family used. "I know this isn't the time, but Marcus and I had some business arrangements. I was hoping we could settle those accounts now that now that things have changed." I stared at him. "What business arrangements?" David's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. "Oh, I assumed he'd told you. We had some investment partnerships, some consulting work. Nothing major, but there are outstanding balances." "How much are we talking about?" "About 25,000. I know it sounds like a lot, but Marcus assured me it would be easy to settle from the life insurance." Something cold settled in my stomach. Marcus and I had discussed finances regularly. He'd never mentioned any business with David. And 25,000 wasn't a small amount for a struggling tax attorney to owe his brother-in-law. That night, alone in our house for the first time since Marcus died, I did what forensic accountants do. I followed the money. I started with Marcus's office, a small room upstairs where he kept client files and did his bookkeeping. I'd always respected his privacy, never snooping through his work documents. But now I needed to understand our financial situation, especially if David was claiming Marcus owed him money. What I found in the first filing cabinet was exactly what I expected. Tax returns for small businesses, estate planning documents, routine correspondence. But in the locked drawer of his desk, that's where everything changed. Inside was a folder labeled Personal Private, containing bank statements I'd never seen, accounts I didn't know existed, and the numbers. The numbers didn't make sense. Monthly deposits of $50,000, $75,000, sometimes over $100,000, transfers to offshore accounts, investment statements showing millions in assets, and transaction records going back 8 years. Our entire marriage. I sat in his chair, staring at documents that proved my husband had been living a double life. The man who worried about our mortgage payment had been moving millions of dollars through secret accounts. The struggling attorney who clipped coupons had been hiding a fortune that dwarfed anything I could have imagined. But the most devastating discovery was still coming. I spent hours going through Marcus's hidden files, my forensic training helping me piece together a financial puzzle that grew more complex with each document. The money wasn't just random deposits. There were patterns, relationships, a sophisticated network of transactions that spoke to organized criminal activity. And then I found the folder labeled Family Connections. Inside were contracts, partnership agreements, and correspondence that made my blood run cold. David wasn't just claiming Marcus owed him money. David was Marcus's business partner. They'd been working together for years, using David's consulting business as a front for money laundering operations. Nicole and James weren't just living well because of car dealership profits. Their lifestyle was funded by clean money that Marcus had processed through his legal practice. James's dealerships were washing cash for criminal organizations, and Marcus was handling the paperwork to make it all look legitimate. Even my parents weren't innocent. The financial chaos I'd always attributed to poor money management was actually deliberate. They were small-time participants, allowing their accounts to be used for transfers, receiving gifts that were actually payments for their cooperation. My entire family had been involved in criminal enterprise, and I, the forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering financial fraud, had been completely oblivious. The worst part was realizing how they'd excluded me, not because they wanted to protect me, but because they didn't trust me. They knew my profession, my ethics, my commitment to financial law. They'd built a criminal network that included everyone in the family except the one person who could expose them. But there was more. In the bottom of the folder was a handwritten letter addressed to me. Catherine, it began in Marcus's familiar script. If you're reading this, it means something has happened to me and you've discovered the truth. I'm sorry. I never wanted you involved, but I also never had the courage to tell you what your family really is. The letter explained everything. How David had approached Marcus shortly after we married, offering him lucrative consulting opportunities. How the small favors had grown into major money laundering operations. How my family had gradually pulled him deeper into their world, using our marriage as cover for their activities. They needed someone clean, Marcus wrote. Someone with legal credentials and no criminal history. Someone married to a forensic accountant who would never suspect her own husband. You were my perfect cover, and I was theirs. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Your family knows about your expertise, Catherine. They've always known. David specifically recruited me because I was married to someone who could uncover their crimes if they ever crossed me. I was insurance. And so were you. If I ever tried to leave or expose them, they'd destroy both of us. The room spun around me. My family hadn't excluded me from their criminal network to protect me. They'd used my reputation and expertise as a threat against Marcus, ensuring his loyalty through the risk to my career and freedom. For 3 days after discovering Marcus's files, I went through the motions of grief while my mind raced through possibilities. Should I go to the police? Should I confront my family? Should I disappear and try to start over somewhere else? But then I remembered something from Marcus's letter that I'd initially overlooked. The money is clean now, Catherine. The accounts I set up are legitimate, sourced through legal channels. Whatever you decide to do with the truth, you won't be left with nothing. He was right. The hidden accounts contained $47 million in legitimately sourced funds. Marcus had been planning his exit strategy, slowly moving clean money into accounts that only I could access. In his twisted way, he'd been trying to save me. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I would test my family just like they tested Marcus. I would see who truly cared about me versus who saw me as a threat to be managed. But I had an advantage they didn't know about. I was a forensic accountant with access to $47 million and detailed records of all their crimes. I crafted a plan that would reveal everyone's true nature. I would tell my family that Marcus had left me in severe financial trouble, that his struggling practice had actually been hiding massive debts, and I was facing bankruptcy. I would ask each of them for help, claiming I needed money to avoid losing the house and destroying my career. If they truly cared about me, they'd help. If they saw me as a threat, well, then I'd know exactly who I was dealing with. I started with my brother David. After all, he'd already claimed Marcus owed him money, so he was clearly comfortable lying to me about their financial relationship. I called him on a Thursday evening, making sure my voice carried the right mix of desperation and embarrassment. "David, I need to talk to you about something serious. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Of course, Kat. Is everything okay? You sound terrible." "I'll explain tomorrow. Can we meet at your office?" The next day, I sat in David's expensive downtown office, surrounded by artwork and furniture that I now knew was purchased with laundered money. David poured himself a scotch from a crystal decanter, acting every inch the successful businessman. "What's going on, sis? You sounded really upset on the phone." I launched into my carefully prepared story. Marcus's practice had been struggling more than I knew. There were hidden debts, unpaid taxes, client escrow accounts that had been improperly used. I was looking at personal bankruptcy and possible criminal charges if I couldn't settle his obligations. "How much are we talking about?" David asked, his tone suddenly sharp. $50,000. "I know it's a lot, but if I can't pay this back, I'll lose everything. My career, the house, my professional license." David leaned back in his leather chair, swirling his scotch. $50,000 is serious money, Kat. And frankly, given what Marcus owed me, I'm not sure I'm in a position to help you out of more debt. "What he owed you?" "David, I've been through all of Marcus's files. There's no record of any debt to you." His expression hardened. "There are a lot of things about Marcus's business you didn't know, Catherine. Trust me on this." The threat was subtle but clear. David wasn't going to help me, and he was willing to lie about Marcus owing him money to justify it. Worse, he was hinting that he knew secrets about Marcus that could hurt me if I pressed him. "So you won't help me?" "I didn't say that. But $50,000 is a significant amount, and I'd need to understand more about these debts before I could consider any kind of loan." Translation. He wanted to know exactly what I'd discovered about Marcus's activities before deciding how to handle me. I left his office knowing that my brother saw me as a problem to be managed, not a sister to be helped. My sister Nicole was next. I drove to her perfect suburban house, where she greeted me with the kind of theatrical sympathy that felt more like performance than genuine emotion. "Oh, Catherine, you look terrible. You need to take better care of yourself during this difficult time." We sat in her magazine-perfect living room while she served coffee in expensive china. I repeated my story about Marcus's hidden debts and my financial crisis. $50,000? Nicole gasped, pressing her hand to her chest dramatically. That's a lot of money, Catherine." "I know it is. But Nicole, I'm desperate. If I can't resolve this, I could face criminal charges. My entire career could be destroyed." Nicole's expression shifted from theatrical concern to something colder. "Have you talked to David about this? He handled some business with Marcus." There it was. The confirmation that Nicole knew about the connections between Marcus and David. She wasn't an innocent bystander in their criminal network. David said he couldn't help because Marcus supposedly owed him money too. "Well, there you have it," Nicole said, her voice taking on a dismissive tone. If Marcus was borrowing from David, he was clearly in deeper financial trouble than any of us realized. So you won't help me either? Nicole sighed dramatically. Catherine, James and I have our own financial obligations. The children's private school, the mortgage on this house, James's business expenses. We simply can't afford to take on someone else's debt problems. I looked around their expensive living room, remembering the photos she constantly posted of vacations and shopping trips. You can afford a week in Hawaii last month, but you can't help your sister avoid bankruptcy? Her face hardened. That's different. That was planned, budgeted for. This is cleaning up someone else's mess. Someone else's mess. She was talking about Marcus, the man who had helped fund their lifestyle through criminal activities, as if his financial problems were completely separate from their wealth. I left Nicole's house understanding that my sister was not only complicit in the criminal network but had fully internalized the justifications for their lifestyle. In her mind, the money they'd received was legitimately theirs, while any problems were Marcus's fault. My parents were the most painful test of all. I met them for dinner at their favorite restaurant, a place they could afford because of the gifts they'd been receiving from the criminal network. I explained my situation, watching their faces as I described Marcus's hidden debts and my potential financial ruin. $50,000, my father repeated, whistling low. That's more than I make in a year as a teacher. I know it's a lot, Dad, but I'm facing complete financial destruction. Everything Marcus and I built together could be gone. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. Oh, sweetheart, you know we'd help if we could, but we barely make ends meet ourselves. I stared at them, these people who had raised me, who had received money from criminal activities for years while maintaining the fiction that they were struggling. Even now, when their daughter faced crisis, they were more committed to protecting their cover story than helping me. Mom, you just bought a new car last month, a brand new Honda Accord. That was different, my father said quickly. That was necessary. Your mother's old car was becoming unsafe. And this is my life falling apart. Doesn't that qualify as necessary? They exchanged glances, and I saw something I'd never noticed before. Calculation. They were weighing the risk of helping me against the risk of exposing their involvement in the criminal network. Catherine, my mother said carefully, maybe this is an opportunity to start fresh. Maybe you don't need that big house and expensive lifestyle. Maybe you could simplify, live more modestly. They were suggesting I embrace poverty while they continued enjoying wealth stolen from criminal enterprises. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. After a week of rejections, half-promises, and outright lies from my family, I was ready for the confrontation. But first, I needed backup. I called my great-aunt Margaret and told her everything. Not about the money I'd discovered, not about my plan, just about how my family had responded to my crisis. Her reaction was immediate and fierce. Catherine, I've watched this family for 78 years, and I've seen how they operate. They take care of themselves first, last, and always. I'm not surprised, but I'm deeply disappointed. She paused, then added, I have $3,000 in my savings account. It's not much, but it's yours if it helps. $3,000. From a woman living on Social Security who probably needed that money for medical expenses. It was more than my entire family had offered combined. Aunt Margaret, I can't take your savings. Yes, you can. Family helps family, Catherine. Real family. That night, I invited everyone to dinner at my house. David and his girlfriend, Nicole and James, my parents, even a few cousins who had been part of the extended network. I told them I had important news about my financial situation. They probably expected me to announce that I was filing for bankruptcy, or maybe that I'd found a lawyer to handle Marcus's mess. Instead, I had something very different planned. As everyone settled into my living room with coffee and dessert, I stood up with a folder in my hands. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know there's been concern about my financial situation since Marcus died." Nods around the room. Concerned expressions. The kind of family support that emerged when they thought the crisis was contained. I wanted to update everyone on my situation and share some discoveries I've made while going through Marcus's files. David leaned forward slightly. Nicole's smile became fixed. My parents exchanged glances. It turns out Marcus wasn't the struggling attorney I thought he was. In fact, he left behind substantial assets, $47 million, to be exact. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. $47 million? My mother stammered. $47 million in legitimate, clean assets. Money that he'd been carefully moving into accounts that only I can access. David was the first to recover. That's wonderful, Catherine. What a blessing to discover you're financially secure." But I wasn't finished. The interesting thing is how he acquired this money. You see, Marcus kept detailed records of every transaction, every partnership, every criminal enterprise he was involved in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And the most fascinating part," I continued, opening the folder, "is learning about his business partners, his co-conspirators, his family." I pulled out bank statements, transaction records, partnership agreements. "David, did you want to explain to everyone how your consulting business has been laundering money for organized crime? Or should I?" David's face went white. "Catherine, I don't know what you think you found, but I found everything, David. 8 years of records proving you recruited Marcus into a money laundering operation. 8 years of evidence showing how our entire family has been participating in criminal enterprise." I turned to Nicole and James. "Including the car dealerships that have been washing cash through fake sales and inflated prices." James started to stand up. "Now wait just a minute." "Sit down, James," I said calmly. "Unless you want me to start calling the IRS and the FBI right now." Saturday. I looked at my parents. "And Mom and Dad, your financial struggles have been quite the performance. Especially considering the monthly payments you've been receiving for letting your accounts be used as pass-throughs." My mother started crying. My father stared at his hands. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued. "I'm leaving. I'm taking the money Marcus left me, and I'm starting over somewhere else. And all of you are going to pretend this conversation never happened." "You can't just leave," David said, his voice tight with anger. "You're family." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Family? You mean the people who spent the last week refusing to help me when I begged for assistance? The family that used my marriage as cover for criminal activities? The family that let me believe I was struggling financially while they lived off illegal money?" "What about loyalty?" Nicole asked. "What about blood?" "What about it?" I replied. "When I needed help, When I was facing what I thought was financial ruin, every single one of you turned your back on me. You chose your own comfort over my survival. That's not family. That's a criminal organization. The room erupted in protests, justifications, and desperate attempts to reframe the narrative. But I wasn't finished with my revelations. "There's one more thing you all need to know," I said, waiting for the noise to die down. "Marcus didn't die of a heart attack." Complete silence. The autopsy showed elevated levels of digitalis in his system. It's a heart medication that can cause cardiac arrest if given in large doses to someone who doesn't need it. I pulled out another document. This is a toxicology report I requested independently. Marcus was poisoned. David stood up abruptly. "That's impossible," the medical examiner said. "The medical examiner said what you paid him to say," I interrupted. "Just like you've been paying people throughout this entire operation. But I had my own tests done on tissue samples I requested for personal closure. The truth was devastating and obvious once you knew what to look for. Marcus had been planning to leave the criminal network. The clean money he'd been accumulating wasn't just an exit strategy for himself. It was evidence he could use against them. They'd killed him to prevent him from exposing their operation." "Who did it?" I asked, looking around the room. "Which one of you decided Marcus was too dangerous to live?" No one answered, but I could see the truth in their faces. It wasn't one person. It was a collective decision, a family vote to eliminate the threat Marcus represented. "Here's what's really going to happen," I said, my voice deadly calm. "I'm leaving, just like I said, but I'm not going quietly. I've made copies of every document, every transaction record, every piece of evidence Marcus collected. They're in safe deposit boxes, with lawyers, with people who have instructions to release everything if anything happens to me." I looked directly at David. "You wanted to use my expertise as a threat against Marcus. Well, congratulations. Now you get to live with that threat yourselves." "You wouldn't," Nicole whispered. "You wouldn't destroy your own family." "You destroyed yourselves," I replied. "I'm just the accountant documenting the damage." 3 days later, I was on a plane to Seattle. I'd sold the house, donated Marcus's belongings to charity, and transferred the $47 million to new accounts under enhanced security. I left behind everything connected to my old life, except for one thing: a promise to Aunt Margaret. Before leaving, I'd set up a trust fund for her. Not enough to attract attention, but sufficient to ensure she'd never worry about money again. She was the only family member who had offered to help when I needed it, and she deserved to benefit from my newfound wealth. The authorities would eventually investigate my family's criminal network. Anonymous tips would lead them to the right documents, the right witnesses, the right evidence. I wouldn't be the one to make those calls, but I'd made sure the information would surface. Marcus's murder investigation would be reopened when new evidence appeared. The digitalis poisoning would be traced back to someone with access to heart medication, probably through James's connections in the medical equipment business. Justice would come, but I wouldn't be there to see it. In Seattle, I bought a small house with a view of Puget Sound. I started a new forensic accounting practice specializing in helping small businesses recover from fraud. The work was meaningful in a way my old job had never been. And the financial freedom meant I could take cases based on impact rather than profit. I kept in touch with Aunt Margaret through encrypted email and occasional phone calls. She never asked about the trust fund, but she mentioned that her apartment had gotten much warmer since she could afford to turn up the heat. It was the best thank you I could have received. 6 months after leaving, I received a news clipping from Aunt Margaret. Local family arrested in money laundering scheme. The article detailed the arrests of David, Nicole, James, and several associates. My parents had been granted immunity in exchange for their testimony. There was no mention of Marcus's murder investigation, but I knew it was only a matter of time. The evidence I'd left behind would lead investigators to the truth eventually. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no regret. Just the quiet peace that comes from escaping a life that was never really yours. A year later, I was sitting on my deck, watching the sunset over Puget Sound, when my phone rang. It was Aunt Margaret. "Catherine, dear, I wanted you to know David was sentenced today. 25 years for racketeering and conspiracy. Nicole got 15 years. James got 12. I took a sip of my tea. And my parents? Probation and community service. They're selling the house, moving to a small apartment. Your mother asked me to tell you. She's sorry. Are you going to tell her you know how to reach me?" Aunt Margaret was quiet for a moment. "No, dear. I think you've been through enough family drama for one lifetime." She was right. The people who had raised me, who should have protected me, who should have loved me unconditionally, they had chosen money over family at every opportunity. Even when I was in crisis, even when I begged for help, they had prioritized their criminal enterprise over my well-being. Aunt Margaret? Yes, dear? Do you ever regret it? Not having more money? Not living a more comfortable life? She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Catherine, I've learned that there are two kinds of wealth in this world. There's money, and there's peace of mind. I've always chosen peace of mind, even when it meant living paycheck to paycheck, especially then, because I could sleep at night knowing I'd earned every dollar honestly. Can your brother say the same?" After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, thinking about the choices that had led me to this quiet deck overlooking the water. I had $47 million. More money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But the real treasure was something much simpler. The knowledge that I'd chosen integrity over complicity, truth over comfort, justice over family, loyalty. My family had tested my limits and found them. They'd discovered that I was willing to walk away from everything I'd ever known rather than participate in their corruption. They'd learned that some things mattered more to me than blood relations. The money had given me freedom, but the truth had given me something more valuable: self-respect. Last week, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a murder case in Phoenix. A forensic accountant had been found dead in his home office, apparently killed during a robbery. But the article mentioned that his computer had been specifically targeted and his client files had been stolen. At the bottom of the clipping, someone had written in pencil, "They're expanding operations. Others need to know what you know." I've spent the last few days researching the victim. Thomas Chen, 38 years old, specialized in financial fraud investigation. He'd been working on a case involving money laundering through car dealerships. Sound familiar? It seems my family's criminal network was larger than I realized. And now someone wants me to know that other forensic accountants are being targeted. Other people with my skills are being eliminated to protect criminal enterprises. The question is, Do I get involved? Do I use my knowledge and resources to help expose this larger network? Or do I stay safely hidden in my new life? But then I think about Thomas Chen, probably sitting in his office just like I used to, uncovering financial crimes and never suspecting that his own expertise made him a target. I think about other forensic accountants out there right now, unknowingly investigating cases that could get them killed. And I realize my fight with my family was just the beginning. The real battle is against the system that allows people like them to operate, to corrupt, to kill anyone who threatens their profits. So I'm making a choice. I'm going back to work, not just helping small businesses recover from fraud, but actively hunting the networks that prey on people like my former self. People who trust the wrong partners, who discover the wrong secrets, who have the wrong expertise at the wrong time. Because if there's one thing I learned from my family's betrayal, it's this: silence protects predators. Truth protects victims. And sometimes, the person with the most to lose is the only one with the power to fight back. The money gives me freedom. The knowledge gives me purpose. And the experience gives me something even more dangerous: the absolute certainty that some fights are worth having no matter the cost. Have you ever discovered that the people closest to you were living double lives? Have you had to choose between family loyalty and personal integrity? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about betrayal, courage, and the price of truth. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away from toxic family is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for listening. And remember, real family protects you. Fake family protects themselves.